Today's movie really reminded me why I decided not to become a hitman. There's just no job security. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. That's right, kids. That's why I went and became a journalist, because there's so much job security there. But look, the Oscars are over. We're back into fun genre films, and today we have a great one for you. We have director Nick Stagliano with us to chat about his latest film, The Virtuoso. Now, of course, the award season just ended, but how cool was it that Sir Anthony Hopkins just won an Oscar on Sunday night? The man is just a living legend, and we get into our discussion with Nick today about what it was like to write for Anthony Hopkins, and specifically a monologue that attracted him to this movie. This was a really fun event. What you're going to see if you're watching us on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page is you're going to see the Zoom cast that we did that folks who attended our virtual screening of The Virtuoso were able to watch. So in case you didn't know this, you could go to the Backstory website, click on events, and you could sign up to get on our mailing list for when we do these virtual events. I think virtual events are going to stay around for a while, actually, because it's just a great way to do outreach all over the nation. But yeah, you could get on our list there. And we did an early screening of The Virtuoso, and it was followed by this Q&A that you're going to watch. And now that the movie has been released to the world, we're obviously releasing this Q&A to the world via iTunes and Spotify for the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast, and via our YouTube page for Backstory Magazine. That's where you could watch it. So, yeah, there's a lot to keep track of, kids, but this discussion has a lot to keep track of. And I got to say, now is still a very important time to support independent film. So please know that The Virtuoso opens today, the day that you're seeing this, April 30th. And you could find it where you would regularly rent movies. And you could also purchase it on May 4th on Blu-ray or DVD. So you have a lot of options to see this movie, and I hope you take advantage of them. Without a doubt, it was a lot of fun interviewing Nick about his creative process, and we went deep into the weeds for a bit on his previous films, and it was just, I don't know. It's one thing I love about these Zoomcasts is sometimes you could just kind of get into the weeds and tell stories of days gone by, and Nick tells a really interesting story about film distribution in the late 90s that I think you'll probably enjoy. And things have changed, of course, but some things remain the same sometimes, of the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So that was something that Nick did a really good job explaining. But he also did a great job explaining his creative process as well. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of fun things to dig online, I hope you also check out our Oscars issue over at backstory.net. We just published it because the Oscars just passed. So it came out about a week beforehand. And look, the cool thing about the Oscars issue is that it always provides a great way for you to go back and study the work, not just by the nominees and the winners, which is what we have both of in our issue, but also the contenders. And, we've put all the screenplays in there, so you could read the screenplays for the contenders, nominees, and winners as well. And we got some great interviews. So I really hope you check out the table of contents over at backstory.net. And if you've never read us before, you could read our entire free issue over at the website. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and YouTube watchers support my passion project. So I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And to sweeten the deal, I'm offering you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. And that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. You'll get anything new that we produce over the course of a year. And you'll get access to our archive as well, which is continuing to grow. We are adding new old issues to it. Sort those words out, kids. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have you as a subscriber. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with director Nick Stagliano about his latest film, The Virtuoso. Okay, Nick, good to see you. I appreciate the hat game, by the way, because hat game knows hat game. So
thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to be here. And yes, I knew I had to step up my game when I've watched a bunch of your previous interviews. So from one hat guy to another, nice to meet you officially. Thanks.
I nod my hat to you, sir. So, look, I want to kind of give people a baseline for you. Did you study writing and directing? What gave you the film bug way back when?
I started basically as a fan of the movies. to me, they were still the movies because my father was just a huge fan of the movies. Growing up outside of Philadelphia, a long time ago, and we didn't have all this cable and all this product. You had 3 UHF and 3 VHF channels, but we would watch all the old movies all the time. My father would let me stay up till midnight on Monday nights when the Oscars used to be on Monday nights to watch. And I would rush into school the next day at about 8 years old saying, so-and-so won the best picture. And none of my friends had any idea what I was talking about. So it started there as a germ, really young. When I went to college, I was taking a writer's path, a short story novelist. I wanted to be Ernest.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at Villanova University. And then they had a communications minor as part of their English major. And one class was called Super 8 Cinematography. Jeff, that should tip you off right there.
I love it.
And so, of course, I took it because it seemed like a pretty silly thing to do and wouldn't be that involved. But the professor there used to show the old movies in 16 millimeter, like with a projector in the room. And all of a sudden, you saw the Maltese Falcon again without commercials, and you realized there was a lot more of it, or there was double the frame, right, or something like that. And he would try to convince the other 20 people that were just trying to get a passing grade about things. And I was mesmerized because it was like, wow, this is a new experience for me. Seeing them again and seeing them as real movies, right? And so he suggested that I should have pursued it. And I was like, well, it's too late. I'm graduating. I'll never sell this to my parents as much as my father loved the movies. And he's like, no, I'm talking about graduate school. And that put that little seed in my brain. And when I graduated, me and 3 of my friends were aimlessly doing our cross-country trip to see the world. And we ended up this is an absolutely true story. We ended up on the campus of UCLA. 4 guys from the East in black sneak into UCLA's campus and are sitting in the quad in front of the library, which was, believe me, not the same experience you had at Villanova, a Jesuit college in the East.
Right.
In order to be incognito, I picked up a magazine, a school magazine, and I opened it. And the article said, so you want to go to film school? And I went, oh my God, this is fate, whatever you want to call it. And it said, we're mostly talking about graduate schools. So it was NYU in the East and UCLA and USC in the West. And so I applied. I managed to get into NYU, and that's what started it. I went to NYU graduate film in the early 80s, and I've been working in the business ever since.
Well, as someone that went to USC, I'm just glad that you didn't have to go to UCLA. I mean, the rivalry.
Oh, no.
Well, that's great. Your NYU experience was probably awesome. I'm curious, when you got out of school, how did you start making the path? Because the first credit that I had for you that I had tracked down for directing was Home of Angels in 1995. And so that's what I was showing as your first feature film. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned on a first feature. What were some of yours, and what were you doing when you got out of film school?
We actually shot that earlier. So it didn't take me 10 years, but it did take 7 before I got that job. And that was a work for hire. And I was thrilled, as you can imagine. As you said, you have to learn, right? Directing is one of those jobs where you almost have to be at your peak when you start, or you might not ever get another chance, right? I mean, today it's a little different with the technology. The plus side of technology today is, you can make a movie on your phone and cut it on your computer, which we didn't have at that time. But still, that's good and bad, right? That's a gift and a curse, right? But so I, coming out of NYU, one of the things you did when you went there, because it was a graduate program, is you volunteered to be on upperclassmen's projects, right? And you just tried to work. So I was working commercials. I was working on crew. In fact, I worked for my director of photography, Frank Prinzi, who was a couple years ahead of me and got out of school earlier and was starting to direct music videos. And also I came up the ranks in the grip and electrics originally, just because I wanted to be on set and learn. And so I worked in the editing room. I worked on the set just so I could get near listening to directors, because you're anonymous. If you're the third electric on a low budget movie and you're standing by a light with a flag, unless you do something stupid, you're anonymous, right? Nobody cares. So you could, if you wanted to, you learn. And then I was in production. On commercials, I started becoming an AD, and then I did 2 features as an AD, and then I was like, I think I learned enough, and now I need to start to get my own movies. So I was offered Home of Angels, which was a great experience. My production designer, Norm Dodge, is the same guy that did the Virtuoso 30 years later or so, right? So
that's great.
You take out of things what you want if you really work hard. So that's my path, right? Just film school, work for everybody as much as you could, learn, and then step up.
That's awesome. And by the way, for the record, I edited on film in film school, both Super 8 and 16, and I highly recommend the experience for anybody. I don't know if they could handle it these days on a film, even though it's even more expensive now because film's so scarce, but just if it's possible for a short film, I highly recommend it because there's a certain rhythm you get into using the machines, winding the reels, watching it, getting that.
I would still listen.
I love it.
I can't do I know some of the greats and the higher level guys are still doing it. I will do it again. I almost tried to do it on this movie, but you're right. It's that feeling and that experience of really studying, and even on the shooting, that if it's not like, I can do 27 takes if I felt like it, and I can go look in the monitor, and it makes you, in one respect, it shouldn't, but it makes you think more and work harder to know that you're getting what you want, or only put certain stuff down. And having said that, one of my better teachers at NYU grad film, who I became a teaching assistant to, told me, this is long ago, so one of these things will be dated, but he said, if you want to be in the film business, you want to be a director, get a job on the set as a PA, get a job in the editing room as an apprentice editor, and get a job in the lab to see how the process goes technically of what happens to the thing you create.
Interesting.
And I did all 3 things. I mean, I didn't work in a lab back in New York. It was Technicolor and DuArt at the time, but I was up there so much as an apprentice editor. Same thing. I just befriended the guys that, I would pick up, dailies from and all, and they would just let me sit there. So I would watch the film get exposed and get taken out and printed, and you're like, wow, I could. So you would have known, and not being a director of photography who really needs to know it, but you as a director might need to know that you could get that extra shot at magic hour because you could push that stock a third more,
right,
and not ruin your whole day or not do this and stuff. And so that was what I learned. And I would, so instead of maybe now working in a lab as my 3rd thing, I would say just work in production as really kind of like an AD or something.
Yeah, that's great advice. A few years later, you had The Florentine in 1999, and that was your second feature. What was your big lesson from that? Persistence.
Love this story. Back in the day when you used to fax people.
We know fax machines.
That only took me 7 years to get that movie set up. That was a play that was done in New York that my friend lit the play, and he thought that I would really like it, right? Because it was that, that blue collar, small town. The play was set in Cleveland, but we adapted it to Pennsylvania, where I knew well, and anybody in the world knows that struggles of, this was a mill town, right? A steel mill that closes down and ruins everything, right? And so people universally understand that, whether you're in a coal mine, steel, car manufacturing, right? That's universal. Here, Germany, UK, people related to it because of the play was so well written and it was such a strong actor piece. We got through the co-writers Tom Benson and Damian Gray, we got a bunch of hot up and coming guys interested from the start. And these guys, this is when they were at their peak now, right? So Chris Penn, Michael Madsen, Tom Sizemore, Jeremy Davies and Tom Sizemore flew from the set of his Saving Private Ryan to be in this movie. And Tommy I had known for years, back when he was in his peak, right? He'd gone from Spielberg to Marty Scorsese to Michael Mann twice, right? You know, that's saying something at that time. Well, I was thrilled because Reservoir Dogs had just come out and everybody wanted to be in that movie. I sent out 50 faxes to companies, right? Thinking I made it. I just did Little Home of Angels, where I thought, you know, Abe Vigoda and Sherman Hemsley were fantastic, but now I got guys that are movie stars, right? And 47 either rejections or didn't even have the courtesy to just reject me.
I love old tech. What were you faxing? What was the document?
I was faxing a one sheet that had the project, right? Not an artistic one sheet, right? Because I didn't have the skills to make a poster or anything like that. Synopsis, you know, title, synopsis, who's involved, the cast, you know, what they were, what I was looking for. Finance, money, big surprise, right? Financing
you had a budget
revenue
number of what you were looking for.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And thinking, no problem. 47. 0. Two were interested, but never followed up. One, which at the time was IEG, Cindy Cowan and Graham King's company. And Graham was doing the sales and Cindy owned the company. And they were like, this looks really interesting. You know, we'd like to read the script. And that was the one I mailed out. And after I did that, I had a friend who was a first AD who had just worked on Don Juan DeMarco, so had just worked with American Zoetrope. And he said, you know, I love this thing, and you already got this cool cast. He goes, do you mind if I give it to Fred Fuchs? And I'm like, no, of course not.
Famous producer, for anyone that doesn't know.
Fred ran Zoetrope for 12 years with Francis. He produced Tucker, you know, The Rainmaker, Mi Familia, Virgin Suicides, Dracula, because that's where he had known Tony from. Imagine that call, an exec at American Zoetrope saying, hey, we got this, you know, and we like it and we want to come on board and, you know, help you and exec produce. I'm like, thank you. American Zoetrope put their cover on the script. Remember in those days when you had to send out scripts and it would be UCAA and UTA and William Morris? Well, now it was American Zoetrope instead of Nick Stagliano. And it didn't get us any more. But I had IEG and they were great. They stayed true and they came in, and now it became a great deal because American Zoetrope took all the kind of business out of it. And now I had Francis to kick off some ideas and Fred, and that was great. And it still took 2 more years. I mean, we shot in 97, 98. We finished in late 98 and we came out in 99. That general experience was persistence, right? And
I would counter that even today, people, you know, most companies still have a fax machine somewhere. It's never being used.
It's on a lot of their header, right? Still at the bottom for fax, but
maybe people should still fax things in because they'll rise to the top of the stack.
Maybe that would separate them now.
Yeah, no one else is faxing. It could be
so they won't get lost in the spam folder, right? That's a good idea. I might try that again.
All right. Well, so briefly, biggest lesson on the Florentine. Obviously, a step up for you directorially. You're working with these luminaries, you know, people who already were at the top of the game. They're helping you out. What was your biggest lesson on the Florentine?
The better the actor you get, right, the less book directing they need. Right. Because when you go to film school or when you read a book about it, you think you're supposed to really sit down with them and tell them about their motivation and their through line and their super. And none of them want to hear that. That's my experience. I could be wrong, but I remember the first day, and Chris became a producer. Chris Penn, who was the great Chris Penn, who was really underrated as an actor, became a friend of mine. That's such a tragedy when he passed away. But Chris was so in love with this project. He would take it around, the actual script, like I said, and go and give it friends of his, which is how we got Madsen. And then Michael calls me and says, hey, who's playing my sister? Because I'm here with Virginia. And they had never worked together at that time. And he goes, would you mind if I give this to Virginia? So imagine getting that call when you're a guy in New York that has Home of Angels on their resume. And Michael Madsen's calling you after The Natural, after True Romance, after Reservoir Dogs. Everybody, these guys were $1 million quote guys calling me going, can we do this? And I'm like, sure. So Chris says, I remember the first day. And I'd known him for like 3 years now. And I go up to him and I go, now in this scene, you're going to do this. And you got to remember, you're going to do this. And he goes, I got it. That was it. That's all he said. That's the most direction I've had in 5 years. I don't need any more.
That's funny.
And you go, okay. And that's what I learned there. But then from all of our filmmaker friends here that listen, I learned about the final battle, which is what I'm in right now, which will bring us to the Virtuoso, which is distribution. Because as you've probably heard many times from more experienced people than me, right? There's the first wave, getting the picture financed, right? And surviving that, right? The second wave, surviving production, getting through production to actually make the movie. You think, I made it, I did it, I'm done. Well, guess what? The final wave, getting the movie seen by more than your family. And so I learned on the Florentine that you even needed to be, if you're, a filmmaker or an auteur as opposed to a for hire, you need to fight all the time till the end. Like I won the Nashville Film Festival for Best Fan Audience Award for Best Picture. Unbeknownst to me, because I love country music, and I went to Nashville. I was having the time of my life. An old guy comes up to me after the screening and says, well, I really like that picture. They don't make them like that anymore. He goes, here, you should call me. And I'm like, what do I want to call this guy for? And then I look at the picture, and he was senior vice president or something, Regal Cinemas. Now, this is 99, 2000 at the time. Right. But even then, I realized they were the number one cinema in the country. I call the next day. I go, hi. I want to put you in touch with our guy. We, I don't know if people know this, but we keep one screen in a lot of our multiplexes for independent stuff. I'm like, oh my God, really? Great. I make a call. A guy says, we can put this on 40 screens or something. Ted loves this, and I'm like, fantastic. I'm so excited now. I've even gotten my own distribution, theatrical, across the country. And I call IEG and I tell that to them. And they're like, well, who's paying for that? I'm like, I don't know. Well, when do they want to do it? This was like April. Right. And because we just made a deal with HBO because that movie became an HBO premiere, which, you might remember them, at the time. And so they're like, because we're going to premiere on HBO in November, so we can't interfere with that. And they let it just go away. And I was like, and I understand it. It's fine. They, I appreciate that they financed the movie and we got along great. And Graham, of course, went on to a whole different career, and Cindy's doing great movies too now, but it wasn't at the same level of importance to them that it is to the filmmaker. So my biggest lesson on that movie then, in that respect, from a producing standpoint then, was you got to cover everything, right? Which is why it was important for the Virtuoso that I go with a good company that, I think appreciated the movie for what it is. And the people that actually see it realize that it's a little special, not the standard assassin fare.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because even as technology changes, the process doesn't change so much, in which, the old adage is you got to get asses in seats. That's what you have to do. And yes, when they were making that offer for you and they said, who's paying for it? It would mean that the studio would actually need to spend money on prints and advertising. And that was like always a significant part of budgets for any film made, and was always tough to navigate for independents, right? Because often they would be spending more on their prints and advertising than they were on the actual movie itself, just to get people in to see it. So then they're doubling their budget. They're doubling like how much they're spending now. And so they have an even bigger fight to recoup. And it's so interesting because now that we're in this scope where obviously we're doing a virtual screening of this, right? People all over the United States are going to be sent a link because we're in this pandemic and we can't do screenings in person safely yet. Exactly. I mean, we're very close. And so it's fascinating because the publicity part of it still is an expense and still something that's time consuming because you have so many different competing things that people could do with their time, that capturing people's attention to watch your film is just as much of a challenge as it ever was, even though the ease of distribution has been solved. Like literally people are going to watch your film looking beautiful in their living rooms. So I mean, like I mean, it is interesting because it's like, yes, like the P&A concept, although the print part of it is gone, the advertising side of it now, with there's so much competing material, it does make sense.
It is. I'm glad, and I'm glad you said. I wanted to be clear. I didn't disagree with any of that.
Oh no, totally.
I just learned. Yeah. As you know, is what we have to do, right? You learn.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that was going to be an issue. I got off that original call going, wow, I just got my movie in 40 screen. And that was at that time.
Oh yeah,
you didn't have the standard now that all these small, before the pandemic. If you had a reasonably good movie that had a little something special, you got the standard 10 city, theatrical, even if it was day and date, but it was good. You got New York, LA, Chicago, maybe my home, Philly. And that was it. Now that disappeared. And then but you didn't even mind that so much. I mean, I minded in general because of why, but you didn't mind it because you were competing with everybody was in that same boat, right? As we all know, the studios had to release, either not release or release their movies on the same boat as mine. So that's a good thing. But you're correct. But my point was, you have to just keep the fight going to try to maximize the exposure on the best quality level. And I mean, that's why I'm glad we made this deal with Lionsgate. They got it. They seemed to get it from the start. They agreed with the title. There was no conversation about changing the name. I mean, I love that title. People always go, why? I go, because it's the beginning of the misdirection of the movie.
Yeah.
You think, oh, the guy's going to be a concert painter. It's going to be Itzhak Perlman or Van Cliburn or somebody, or Yo-Yo Ma, right? And you go, well, he's murdering people. Oh, I get it. He's
it's right up there. It's right up there with the misdirection for the people that are sitting down to a sweet afternoon of watching Michael Haneke's The Piano Teacher.
Exactly.
A lot of misdirection there too.
I was like, great. So good. And now, we're here and doing the best we can to get the word of mouth out there that people luckily now have started to be able to go out and, they only have a choice. Right. So, but you're correct. You're still competing in that space and you still need, it's the same thing I said about, now the technology is good and bad, right? The bad part about everybody with an iPhone can shoot a movie is that everybody with an iPhone can shoot a movie. And then an agent, an actor, a film company gets besieged by all of that product and just, the time. I mean, that's what I tell, I used to give seminars more and tell young students, and I'm the worst. I don't even follow my own advice, as you probably know. Don't take it personal, right? It's a numbers game. When you get rejected, it's just a numbers game, right? Because when I went to see IEG that first time after they bought the movie, and I went there, and they weren't a huge company. It wasn't Paramount. It wasn't Universal. I went to visit them. They were up on, I think they were down below on one of the boulevards, and they had a big office. And I walked into their meeting room, and they had hundreds of scripts on their side, with the titles on the spine. And I'm like, what are they? And they're like, oh, those are like last week's submissions. I'm like, oh my. And so I tried to instill that on young people, which is the lesson of the 50 faxes. You can't take that personally. It's a numbers game. There's a reason why only so many get made in one respect, because you have to deliver the goods. You have to do your work, right, and make it special and make it worth either somebody financing, or in this case, we have to make people want to come to see it.
Tell your friends to see the Virtuoso. If you're hearing this or seeing this, tell your friends to see the Virtuoso. They could find it online anywhere that they find their online movies. But before we get to the Virtuoso, this is my last big question, and we could skip through it really quick. 2011, you were talking about perseverance. You persevered a long time. 2011 was your last, directorial feature of Good Day for it, and it also had Hal Holbrook in it, which is really cool. Because he's such a great actor. And so just what was your big lesson there, and anything you want to tell us about working with Hal Holbrook?
We could talk days about that, because Hal was in the Florentine, and that's where I met him. And that's where I met him. And that was one of those, going back to what I said. So Chris, running around Santa Monica with the script for the Florentine under his arm, was giving it to like a whole bunch of guys to play this character of Smitty, who was like the bar drunk, but just cool enough that all these guys looked up to him, right? So he was the sage, right, of that prose, right? So he always distilled wisdom. And so we were going out to, same thing almost with The Mentor. We were going out to a bunch of these old time great guys that I just had admired for so many years. And Chris, in that world, Chris had managed to get the script to Robert Mitchum.
Wow.
Now, yes, I would think you would appreciate that, right?
Yeah.
Because this was, unfortunately, by the time we got it set up, he had passed away. But he liked it because, Chris was he was a force of nature, right? And he had a lot of respect out there. And so, they took it seriously, and Mitchum wanted to do this part. And I was like, oh my God, Robert Mitchum. I'm like, this is unbelievable. So we were, in my mind, there was no reason to call him, no reason to bother his agent, no reason to make a final deal until I knew when we were ultimately going to shoot the movie, right? And sure enough, he gets sick, and unfortunately, he passes away. And then we get the financing. So now we got the movie, and it's a go movie, and we don't have Smitty. And my casting director in New York just said, I don't know that he's on your list, but what do you think about Hal Holbrook? I'm like, oh my God, I grew up watching Hal Holbrook, right? And she's like, I think he'd like this. I'm like, sure. And he said yes. He came. He showed up. Just crushed that role in that movie, the Florentine.
He's the best. I totally forgot that he was in it.
And for some reason, I'm really thrilled because he loved that movie. And him and Dixie Carter, his wife, they would watch it once a year. And then I would get a call, and it was both of them. And he would say, we just watched the movie again. And it was great. And I'm like, well, they came to New York because he was doing Twain again in the East Coast. This was probably in 1998 and 99. No, I'm sorry, 2009. And he said, Dixie and I are going to be in New York. Can you come up and meet us? And I'm like, absolutely. So on the drive up from Philly to New York, I always had this idea for Good Day for it, the title, because my father would tell me this story when he was a boy that this old man used to walk past him and his two brothers every morning where they lived, and he would tap his hat and he would say, good day for it. As a dramatist, I would always sit there going, what's it a good day for exactly? I was like, my mind went in really dark places, right? Because I'm like, what if the guy just goes, And so I had that idea. So by the time I land and I meet them for lunch, I go, hey, I got this idea for both of you that I want to do with both of you. Like, whoa, what? And I go, you own this diner. And on this day, a guy comes home that everybody thought was bad, but he's not. And fate intervenes, and all the guys he was running from show up. It's a ticking clock, pot boiler. And they're like, well, great, we're in. They were so excited. I was like, wow, driving home. I'm like, oh man, now I got to come up with this script. And so I called James Wolfe, who wrote the Virtuoso, who I know.
Bring that up. This is the first time you guys wrote together.
This is the first time because I'd met him he had a short film that he had made. I was at a festival with the Florentine, and I met James because he had directed and wrote and directed a short film that I liked. And he's since just focused on writing, but he was really good at research and structure, right? So I gave him that story, and he came back with a first draft, the 3-act breakdown of Good Day for it. And after we did that movie and we got along, and then, unfortunately, same thing at the very end, Dixie got too sick. She was still with us, but she was too sick. They didn't want her to fly to the Poconos in winter in the cold and all that stuff. So I was luckily, happy Kathy Baker stepped in. So I had to get another world-class actress to come in and do that. And so I worked with Hal the second time. And so when we did Good Day for it, that was really, I came up with this idea for them because I liked them so much, and they were fans of the Florentine, that I wanted to do that. And then I just surrounded that movie with these great, character actors too. Lance Henricks and Robert Patrick was cast. Fantastic. Robert Englund. When Robert Englund's not playing Freddy Krueger, he's a student of cinema, right? And a student of film. And so he got in there perfectly. I remember that conversation. He was in England doing one of his junkets, one of these hard junkets and all. And they set up a call. He was on a train in Manchester. He goes, I'm channeling Walter Brennan meets Sam Peckinpah. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. For a Good Day.
That's a great combo.
I was like, I'm done. My directing is done. And so that took us to Good Day for it. That's about Robert Patrick's character. Everybody thinks he's the bad guy in the town that had to leave, right? But he really wasn't. He made one mistake and he left to save his family. And I had always thought that same kind of setup. But what happens if the guy walks in that diner for 5 o'clock, bad guy to the core, but something happens so that he's starting to turn good? But it's the same setup but people are after him. And I called James up and I said, look, we're going back to the mountains. Here's what I'm thinking. Let's come up with something. And so the same thing, he came up with a great first draft. He came up with the voiceover in the second position, because I said, just go watch, all the classic noir films. And we're going to, modernize it from style. But really, that's what it's about. And that's how that started. Well,
so getting to today's film, so the Virtuoso, when did that start with you and James? I know it's a terribly boring question, of course, but when did you get your idea for the Virtuoso? Let's get it out of the way. And remember, we're in the non-spoiler section. We'll get to the spoiler section soon.
2014, 2015. So I probably would have gotten the first 3-act draft in fall of 2015. Like I said, I'd always had Anson Mount in mind because we had met years earlier in New York for a different project of mine that we haven't shot yet. And I liked him a lot when I met him. I thought he was underrated as an actor in general, but he was still the star of Hell on Wheels, the Western. It was on AMC at the time. So, I'd love to work with him. So he loved the script. We flew out, Fred Fuchs and I flew out to Calgary to meet him because he was shooting the last season of Hell on Wheels. And we spent a weekend going line by line. And at the end of the Sunday night, we shook hands. We had a deal because, he's from Tennessee and I'm from outside Philly suburbs. And that still means a lot to some people, and no paperwork, no term points or anything like that. Right.
Very dangerous way to go, by the way, but sure.
Yeah. Well, in 2015, it was just enough. Right.
Yeah.
And so that was the start, and then he left CAA and went to UTA, and the project, went over there with them, and they liked it too. So they were very helpful.
So tell me about your creative process for a second. When you sit down to write, how important is outlining to your process?
I like the classic 3-act structure going back, that's where I learned screenplay from Sid Field and McGee, those are still my go-to things, right? In this situation, I had the title, I had the location of the 5 o'clock at the diner. So that went over here, right? That was second act plot point here, right? Now what? Well, I need something to happen at the beginning to catch everybody's attention. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of index cards and writing. I just break down a blank. I used to use just art paper, but now I use foam core, the soft foam core, because you could work for both. You could write on it if you wanted to, but you could also stick things in it. So,
I like to geek out on this. Do you have a certain amount of note cards that you consider to represent an act? Some people do, some people don't. No one way to do it.
No. I've had some of my movies have like 8 cards, and that's the whole first act. Some of them I have 50, and you're like, whoa, what am I doing? Oh, well, that's just an eighth. That's just but you just want to, if it come, that's the way I start to think something might be good, right? If you just sit down in the chair and close your eyes and you go, yeah, I see it, I see that, boom,
great,
put it up there, and then you look back and go, why did I do that? Or we don't need that, or something. So
how long would you say your outline took with James for the Virtuoso before you started screenwriting?
Probably 3 months.
Okay.
3 months, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I'm not a big fan of all the people that try to impress you with the fact that they wrote the script in a weekend, I'm sure it happens. Like I said, sometimes I have that stream of consciousness attack and I can go, really good writing takes time, takes work. It's painful. That's why I try to avoid it as much as humanly possible. But so it would have taken 3 months probably.
Briefly, and then we're going to get into our spoiler section. What is really important for you as a director in pre-production? Something that over the years you've found useful, because it's long been said and repeated many times that before you get on set, making some of your most important decisions, or at least getting them out of the way, some of your logistics, is freeing for a director so that you could focus on the scene, the actors, the moment. What are things that have helped you through pre-production as a director?
Well, I'll tell you, there's the good and the bad, or the bad of the ones that I'm still not good at. I always like to blame myself as a producer for that, because that's where you might wear too many hats. And look, we never have enough money, right? No matter who it is. The kid making a $50,000 movie, me making a several $1 million movie with a legend, Christopher Hampton, Steven Spielberg, Marty never has enough money, right? He only had 135 million on The Irishman or something. It sure wasn't enough money, right? So we never have enough money. But it's hard to cry too much at that level, right? So, but I've found what I never have done strongly enough, I don't think. I got better at it here because Frank Prinzi, my DP, and I had known each other for 30 years, and we had a sort of history because I worked for him when we got out of film school. Like, he was a little older than me, but I would like to always be a little bit more prepared in terms of the conviction of my frame and lens choices, right? Because when you don't have the chaos and the fog of war that you have on your first day, and then you're just trying to get that shot, right? And you go, man, I have it written down here as a medium with this, and it all goes to heck, right? And you go, just whatever you got, just move the camera over here and shoot, because I got a shot of Anson. So I think in pre-production for directors, and I'm not even talking from a technical point of view, I don't, you could put a 75, a 25, 100, 250. I'm not that insane about that stuff. I trust the DP to do that. But I'm talking about just really the fact that in Act 1, in this coverage, I had written it down. I had made a note in my script when it was calm and it was peaceful, because I knew that in Act 3, it was going to be the same exact situation or whatever, but I was going to be on the 150 because I wanted everything to be out of focus except the eyes or something like, that I think directors need to focus on early, because if you could really lock it in and know it, that kind of detail, if it's important to you, to get it done, get it early. When you lock it, when you put it in your margins, hold to it, because during the shooting, in that chaos, you could lose sight of that a lot. So to me, that's a weakness of mine. And usually it's probably because I'm producing still a little too much before I go and put on my director's hat. But on the plus side, I think really it's still just having the confidence to let your partners do their job. Right.
Sure.
It's always the key in if you listen to any business, successful business. And this is lessons I've learned from all these great actors that I ask. What was it like working with so-and-so? How did this person work? Right. What was it like working with Spielberg on the set of Saving Private Ryan? Right. How was Marty on Bringing Up the Dead? Right. For Anthony Hopkins. How was Sir Richard Attenborough on Magic? You have to take advantage of that if you want to be better all the time. So, those would be my two pieces. One I don't do well, and one I think I'm getting better at.
Thank you for reminding me to rewatch Magic, because that has been on my watch list for a long time.
Oh man, I've got to rewatch what his favorite was, and everybody will go. Anson was terrified from Silence of the Lambs, right? And he had a big thing about getting over that, But I would go Magic. To me was just like.
Magic's great. Magic's great. All right. Last question before the spoiler section. What was your budget and schedule?
25 days, 3 in California, 22 in the mountains of the Poconos, and $5 million.
Oh, wow. That's great. You got a lot on the screen for that. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, so, the folks that are just seeing this as part of our virtual screening, you're not scared of spoilers, but if you have not yet seen the movie, this is where you need to press pause, go out, rent the Virtuoso wherever you have been watching movies during this silly pandemic. Go find the Virtuoso and rent it and support independent film, and then come back and watch the rest of our interview here on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, or hear it as a podcast in iTunes or Spotify for the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast. All right, here we are. We are in the spoiler section. Now we're inside the mind of a hitman, right? His character name literally is the Virtuoso. We never get a name for him. And I'm curious, one of the things that you're doing right off the bat, and it could be dangerous, right, if done wrong. And I think you had the right amount of it, because it was so clear what you're going for. But we are given voiceover of the mechanical thoughts that he's having as an assassin right at the beginning of the flick. And there's a lot of voiceover going back and forth, and it has a payoff later that we'll get to, of course. But what did you find as a guiding rule for how much voiceover to use?
My suggestion there to James was that clearly, to me, put us back in the 40s, right? Of a film classic noir, right? Even going back to Sunset Boulevard. But, a lot of the other ones, especially Chandler's stuff, did that a lot more, right? And I said, number one, that'll set that tone. But James came up with writing him that voiceover in the second position. It's you, right? He doesn't, because mostly if you do that, it's in the first position they're talking about themselves, right? And so that was unique, which kind of was interesting. It's subtle, but it's unique. And a lot of people have referred to that now. And then it's a topic of conversation as we got along in the editing room as to how much was too much. And we trimmed a bunch. What's in the final movie is after fighting to keep what's in there in, because some people even want it more out.
Sorry to interrupt. What percentage would you say is in the final movie based on what you started with?
I would say probably 60, 65%.
Okay.
We didn't cut 80% out or something, because I thought it was a key element. It's part of his character and all. But, as any good film takes over, right? The reason it's show me, don't tell me in movies is because you get that information. But the opening is important because of what you just said. It just sets up in his performance, even it's the mechanical, right? The robotic lack of emotion in that voiceover, even, which he was specific about, that kind of kind of makes you feel like you're, what is talking? Is that even a human being, right? And then it becomes more clearing up some of the mystery, right? Just to keep us on the right path. Because I think purposely, but no audience, me, doesn't like to be too confused or too upset that they're getting taken off the wrong path. So a little bit of, voiceover there brings us back in. And so I thought we did pretty good. I thought it worked just enough. And there's the images, as I said before, it's key to the setup, but then the images and the plot, once he gets up to the diner, right, that just the sheer dramatic plot of who's White Rivers, right, takes over. And so you need less of the voiceover. And but I still wanted to do respect because of what you said, the payoff. The end, you have to keep it to bring it back,
right? To bring it back and to have it work. And we'll get to that. But so, it's interesting. Just really briefly, you have this fascinating setup in which an assassin's trying to take a hit and somebody's having sex and the girl's on top and the guy's obscured. And I had to rewind it for a second because I could not figure out what's going on, in which, you see blood splatter on the girl. And I'm like, oh God, he shot her. And then it's no, he didn't shoot her at all. And I realized he shot the guy's toes because that was the only thing he could see. And I saw these little flakes of toes, kind of pop up in the frame. What gave you the idea for that strange way to get the guy to sit up in bed and get the innocent person out of the way?
Well, it was important that he didn't kill an innocent, even then, right? Even though she's most likely a prostitute, right? It was important that he doesn't injure a non-combatant, number one, right? So he needs a device, but also that's where in voiceover where he kind of lets you know that he follows the rules, right? So he was told on this specific job, send a message, right? So the message is clear in terms of he wants the guy in a perfect position to basically blow his brains out, right? So, and that's that. So the Virtuoso starts the misdirection, even though we know the title, but the title hasn't appeared yet, right? Because it's not a classic title sequence. But that's the beginning of the misdirection because that's the one sequence, that whole 2-minute, 45-second opening sequence is my homage to the Michael Manns and Ridley Scotts of the world, because that's the slickest looking. Right. And you might, for a moment, think it's going to be a conventional hitman movie. The guy's just going to go keep killing people and all. But then, as soon as it fades up to that cabin and the Blair brothers bring in that great melancholy, the score of theirs, that you immediately, I think, start to realize it's not going to be that. So that was the purpose of that, show that he's faithful to the rules that he gets, but also that he won't injure a non-combatant.
And that's a theme throughout the movie in which, the concept of collateral damage is discussed early on. And, he, on his next hit, accidentally lights a woman on fire, as collateral damage, a car wreck, gets a mom doused in flames. And he feels really bad about it. It gives him PTSD because he really, has a code of ethics about his kills. When did you come up with that idea between you and James that this was going to be the inciting incident for the movie that really breaks his stride as an assassin and kind of is a bit of his undoing?
That was in the very original conversation about when we were breaking it down, that something needs to happen. Something bad needs to happen in this respect, beside killing somebody that starts to change him. And so we were trying to figure out what it could be. It could have been worse. I had them both. I had her mom and son burning up originally, but I was told that might be too much. So I toned that back. So
leave the kid alone. Alfred Hitchcock.
Leave the kid alone. It's more powerful to have that shot of the kid's face, right? It just screams, because I wasn't interested in the gore of it. Like I said, it wasn't about the special effects, even though I thought they were well done by my stunt team. And that was a real torch up, and God love the stunt woman, she wanted to go again, but we were losing. But so no, that was always in it from the very note stage about something had to happen to start breaking him down.
Well, so in the film, you have the relationship between the mentor, played by Anthony Hopkins, and the virtuoso, and it's an interesting relationship. You know, at first it seems kind of cold, but in the scene that you were calling out earlier, that we'll get to now at the gravesite, you know, it's clear that the virtuoso is kind of really letting this kill get to him, and the concept of collateral damage. And although we could probably assume he's had some in the past, for whatever reason, this one specifically got to him. And you just have this great monologue from Hopkins, where he really gets a chance to just get into it, you know, have his own PTSD flashback to Vietnam, working with the virtuoso's father. And I thought it was an interesting setup. It was good that it took place, like, you know, in a cemetery. And I'm just curious about the writing of it and how that then basically landed Hopkins to be the mentor, because I can't imagine the movie without it, to be honest.
Thanks. I agree. And I think that, again, Fred Fuchs and I, so when he got the first draft, it didn't have that. It didn't have a couple other things. Like I said, we discussed the deputy later when you get to him too, because that changed. But he knew what I was telling. He knew me. He knew the Florentine, which was really just a character piece of, you know. And so he was like, you know, this is much better than people will think. But I think we need that scene to do two things. One, clearly he knew it was on my wish list of people we were going to try to go get. But then he was like, so not only would it give us a better chance to possibly get some, you know, somebody at this level and make it worthwhile, but also it'll clarify the fact that this is not an employer-employee relationship only. Excuse me. I have a new fan coming. So here's the team mascot.
Oh, hello.
This is Rebel. Rebel, say hi to the world.
What kind of dog is Rebel?
Rebel is a Lhasa Apso. She is been with us, was on the set in the cold, bitter snow and everything. So
how old?
She wants to say she's 6, but she looks like a puppy.
Okay. Very cute.
So you have to sit down so I can start talking about this important
You can keep her on your lap. You can keep her on your lap.
So I said, I don't want it to be, you know, the syndicate, right? Get a call from the guy that sits only behind the desk. And so he's like, well, I think you need to come up with something, and it's got to be in the first act, obviously, to establish that relationship. And I was like, yeah, I get it. So that's one of those where I was sitting around, and I knew I wanted to do it because I knew where it would fit. And I had an idea of that I wanted to tie in the past with the present and introduce that kind of relationship, you know. So I started doing research on mistakes in American military history. Sure. And of course, I came up with My Lai, but, you know, I did research. My research told me that My Lai was actually called Pinkville. So all that stuff is heavily researched and true. And that's why Hopkins only calls it Pinkville, because that was the designation on the maps that anybody there would have gotten, right? And I thought, well, most people of a certain age will get that immediately, right, or figure it out. But it's also something that if you actually had been through, I can't imagine that you would have just blown it off the next month or something, right? So that was the genesis. And then I spent days researching trial transcripts, trying to follow some of the soldiers that talked about it years later and all that kind of stuff, because that was my whole genesis of what I liked about that character. And the seed that I was telling you about is really, well, guilt is easy, right? It's one thing, guilt, but at a deeper level, it's humanity, right? So humanity starts to grow in him like a cancer. It should be a good thing, right? But for somebody in his position, it's not. And so I came up with that, scene and that speech. It was longer, and he he was great. I mean, it could have been it could have been at least 2 minutes longer. We had to regrettably trim some pieces out.
You said earlier you sometimes just need to let these lifelong pro actors kind of go. Was there any direction that one could give the great Anthony Hopkins? Or
yeah, there was at the end, which in fact, if you watch the EPK there with Anson and Tony when they speak a little bit, you could see it because Anson refers to it. First day, it was the first day.
Wow.
First scene. And I got to start with that after 10 years or so out of the directing chair.
Why would you schedule that for your first?
Well, it was his schedule. He was going to go to Rome to do Two Popes, or he was still in the last season of Westworld. So if we came out here, we could get him. We could get him for one of these 2 weeks in January of 2019. I'm like, well, we're going. We're doing it. I waited 2.5 years at that time now to get him back in. And so we're doing it. And then when you have that pressure, you're not going to start as much as you even wanted to start on the simpler scenes. You're like, you can't afford it because you need to get that scene. Those were conversations beforehand with him about the character, about that speech, about the fact that he knew some guys from Vietnam that he was heavily relying on their experience that they had told him about the anguish and the regret, that they had that he, as his character, wouldn't let in. Where he was asking me if he could change, really, could I change the to, and I'm like, sure, if you want to, change it to the phone book for like, you're here and you said yes. I don't care.
I mean, I hope he wins an Oscar this weekend for The Father. His work is just
right. So you go, okay, but no. So at the end of the scene, when he approaches Anson and he gets toe to toe, right? There's a moment at the end when right before his final line where he says, "Next time, answer your phone." Right. There's a reason when he approaches him, he needs to take that extra beat, which he does now in this cut. He has to take that beat to see in Anson's eyes when he says, because right before that, they're at the cemetery, at the gravestone, and he looks down and says, "But me and your dad, we didn't, and I'm grateful for that." And then he goes and he steps forward, and then he sees that his machine is broken. He sees it in his eyes. And he sees it the way Anson stepped back. He normally wouldn't have done that if he was the machine, right? He would have stayed stoic. And it's that subtle. And I didn't see it the first couple takes. And so I actually had to earn my salary that day and go in and say, "Hey, Tony, you remember that this is this, and this is what we need to see. We're not going to notice it on the first pass, but I know, and you know, that's what makes you make this horrific decision. But it's also the reason the movie changes tone completely, and the reason it becomes not an action assassin movie." Right. So then he puts into motion a plot to inevitably put his dog down, which is also the symbolic reason why we had the dog. It's not just a guy and a dog movie again, right? There's a little bit more going on with that. And then it pays off at the end too.
I'm curious though, because it's like based on that moment, I was going to ask about, the mentor's decision to basically have other assassins go after the Virtuoso, which he does. And it's interesting because it's almost like he wants to do a mercy killing because, as you said, he feels like the machine is broken. But at the same point, for this great monologue that he just delivered in the graveyard, he also is still broken years later, and no one's taken him out. So it's an interesting thing about how that relationship works and how that world works. When did you get the idea that was going to be the rest of the movie? Is that basically the mentors decided that the Virtuoso is going to be a liability for him and he needs to have him taken out?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it's not there easy to see, but there's two good questions in there. So yes, the mentor has that same moment, as you said, that he hasn't had for 30 years. That's why he's really angry at the end, right? When he says, when he turns into good old, almost Hannibal Lecter and goes, next time, Auntie, I mean, he scared the crap out of all of us, right? In a second, because his guard was so down on that whole speech, almost were to the tears where he was crying. But then he comes back, and what he realizes is that, wow, I almost just did what you said. I almost just became human, that I'm trying to prevent him from all this anguish. Because if I would have felt this for those 30 years, when I haven't talked this much in 30 years, what a horrific existence I would have had. So to me, I think that's what justifies, because other people have asked about that. He thinks that he sees that his machine's broken, that it's a weakness, that he needs to do the thing that he thinks out of love is the mercy killing and all. But there's that little germ of hope, even in the mentor, that if my boy can survive this night, then he might be back. I might have been wrong. He might be back. And so when he gets that call at the end and he sees the first phone ring, he's not completely stunned. That's why he plays it so well, right? When he picks up the first phone, we should all know by now, without dialogue or voiceover, that he's surprised that the first phone's ringing, because that's the Virtuoso's phone. But he handles it great, because he's like, you okay?
Yeah.
And he wants to now know, has he figured it out? Because maybe my boy's back, right? And then when he says loose end, he's concerned. So, there was a lot going on there, but you picked that up, which is great. And I think that was my justification for why he doesn't just get a guy to, a sniper to just take him out in that respect. I mean, he's given him a chance, and he's maybe hoping that he's not too far gone. And that's drives the whole rest of the plot. And that's why it's also the reason why it's not one-on-one, right? It's also the reason why the waitress is, what we find out in the flashbacks, is so angry, because she didn't know that all these other players were going to show up, right? And so it was, in one respect, it's the mentor's plan to go, look, maybe if he survives one-on-one, I'm not sure, but if he can get through this night of some of my best operatives, right, then I'll have hope that he's back, or I can bring him back. And so I think that was the purpose for that. But that makes sense. It is right. It's a mercy killing. Because I think what separates this, to me, and what I focused on, which happily most people got, is, I just say this a lot and people think I'm nutty, but I mean, I perceive all my movies to be love stories, but, I took this to be a love story. To me, it's a love story. The mentor loves the virtuoso to the best of his ability. Virtuoso loves the mentor like the surrogate father he never had. That's why that scene is triply important then, right? The waitress loves the mentor. We don't know it, but almost at the same level of the virtuoso. And in the sequel, Lionsgate, that you'll find that out. You would find that out, right? And then the virtuoso and the waitress actually might legitimately start to feel love for one another, which is why we're not sure about her. But when the dog comes back into play at the end, it's a perfect metaphor to set that up, right? She can't. What's it mean? On a first level, it's great. We're cringing. She's not going to shoot the dog, right? We don't have another John Wick. We don't want another dog killed. And of course, I can't kill the dog here with the mascot. She would never forgive me. But it's more that it's that same seed now has been planted. Even though she could take out the virtuoso, her training still kicked in there. But there's that little bit that has opened up, right?
Which is great. And, I'm curious about the ending variants that you could have played with, because I could have seen them, he is tricked by her. he tries to kind of flush her out a couple times and see if maybe she is who she says she is, or if she isn't. And he kind of fails to see it until it's a little too late. And, in the ending that you have, obviously she does kill him. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I'm curious, did you ever consider other variants of possibly the two of them turning on the mentor and hunting him down? Or is that just nothing that was ever on the table?
Very early on, I would probably say, even seriously, I mean, jokingly during the shoot, we had, of course, multiple people were volunteering the different endings, right, or the alternate ending that I should shoot, right. But early on, James and I were like, no, I want everybody to believe, to think that when he goes back to the motel, there's still a question. We're still interested. We're still concerned, because the only question is, well, the multiple questions are, is she the loose end because he has turned back? The mentor was correct. He survived. His killing machine is back, and he's unfortunately going to kill her and eliminate any loose ends. Or is it the fact that he was playing just as coy with the mentor on that phone call, because he now knows that his father set him up, and he's still got some business in here, but then he's going to go back. And was that going to be the ending where he goes back? And that's why I wanted all that misdirection of Tony prepping, right? Cleaning his guns, looking out. We don't, that works on its own level, just because it's another reason to have Tony beautifully photographed in the movie. But two, we don't know where that is. We don't know what he's thinking. We don't know what he's preparing for. And really, he's not. He's just, that's his calming. You asked about what we do for writer's block. What he does for fun is clean his guns, a guy like that, right? Yeah. So that was the purpose of that. So no, there was never, other than in this incarnation, a lot of people just wanted the movie to end, in the mirror, in the car, when she says virtuoso, cut. But I thought, for the one of the reasons we just went through, I thought the dog, first off, you finally get the gag of what he was talking about, where he says, just look in the trunk, right? I don't have an insert of when she looks in the trunk. And, that's where I think audiences are smarter, and they will catch it and they appreciate that. So when she drops the bag, you go, oh, that's what he was talking about. He wasn't worried about the guns. He wasn't worried about the dog saving his life. He's worried about this other human or other living being. And so I thought it was, to me, it doesn't take, and cutting that out and ending on the mirror, which would have been just a cool shot, boom, cut to black, would have been good. But I think that this was just this strong, and for the extra, I think it's an extra minute and 30 seconds. I think it just sets that tone for the future.
Well, it was also cool the way that, now she's doing the monologue, and, she's taken over the role of thinking that she's invulnerable. She's the best in the world. Going back for a second, and I will get one more to the ending in a second, but what did you learn about gunplay and action through the home invasion and the chase of the deputy in the woods? Was there anything that you learned as a director for those action scenes that you want to impart?
Well, I knew I wasn't good at it, because it's,
you did fine. What are you talking about?
Well, going in, I had the same guy that was my stunt coordinator, Drew Leary, out of New York, did good day for it, because we had a couple fights in that, and we had weapons. He had gotten up to a higher level now after working hard on bigger shows. So, he agreed to come and do it. And I just realized, more importantly, how important the preparation is for that stuff, because nobody has to tell me that you don't want to hurt people. I mean, we want to make believe, right? It's the way I was raised. So, but a lot of stuff happens when you have all these moving parts, no matter how organized you can be. So I learned that I should have had more time for preparation. It just would have made things a little less stressful for me. But I think for all we needed in this movie, everything looks pretty good. I mean, the fight in the bedroom with Handsome Johnny and the Virtuoso. Now, both of those guys are used to, fighting and stuff in their movies and all, but we did bring in stunt people for some of those shots, which was the first time I ever really worked with real stunt people to cover that. So that was an education for me, exactly how much you can get away with and what you can't get away with, and how much of the shot you can really use and not go, oh, I could clearly see that's a stunt person or not. And
Sure.
That was one thing. More took longer than I had thought because of my inexperience, and that I would tell anybody out there, who's interested in doing that, to just allow more time and be prepared more. But then with the gunplay, I mean, I haven't used. I mean, there's been guns in all my movies, but I'm not a huge, I don't have a 30-person body count, usually, or something like that. And I know guns pretty well in real life. So, but I would recommend people really do research and get professionals that are charged
Sure.
the armor and their stunt guy. But I thought we did really good. And the sequence with the Virtuoso and the deputy, as fate would have it, it started snowing.
I was going to say that really enhanced it, and it made the chase kind of a little cloudier going through the forest like that. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I was looking at that footage, I was like, my first reaction, for some bizarre reason, I'm sure some of your international fans will get, I always said, this looks like the back lot of Cinecittà. Now, I've never been to Cinecittà, and it's in Rome, and I have no idea if they have a snow forest scene or nothing. But when when we had the condors up high, with cutting that moonlight, and then we had some rim light, and then the snow. It starts snowing. I'm like, this is just beautiful, right? This is great. And I was like, it looked so good that it looked almost fake, or it looked almost made up, right? And I was like, this is what or Francis would have done that, on one of his big studio shoots and all. But luckily, the freezing cold and the temperature worked for our advantage, and we had to enhance it a little bit because we shot that out of sequence, obviously. So the scene at the deputy's car was shot at the end. So we did have to enhance a little bit of the snow, just enough where I think it looks pretty good.
Right, digitally to start it off. And I've been there in Rome, by the way, and it doesn't really have woods that look that beautiful. So you beat them out. You beat them out. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And of course, we just published our amazing Oscars issue right before the Oscars happened. So there is still a lot to read in there if you didn't have a chance to read it. You could even look on our website. A fun thing that I did was I put out a crossword puzzle, and that's free. You can find it on the Backstory website, and I really hope you check it out and play it, because it was just a lot of fun coming up with the silly questions and the trivia and even the hints. It's all digital, so you could click on it and do it digitally, or you could print it out and use pen and paper, and you're gonna have fun either way. But look, it would really mean a lot to me to have you guys consider becoming subscribers. I want to offer you a discount coupon code SAVE5 that will save you $5 off a subscription to Backstory Magazine. It'll give you access to any new content we produce, and it'll give you access to our archive, which we are continuing to add new old issues to. That's right, old issues that are new to the archive, because we are building it backwards, because that's what we have to do to restore every single issue into the archive. So that is fun. But look, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a subscription. So there is plenty to explore. I don't want to rattle off every single article for you, but you could look in the table of contents at backstory.net to find out what's in our Oscars issue. And as always, we have more content than just Oscars in there as well. We have an interview with Eric Heiserer for Netflix's new series, Shadow and Bone. We have a full Blacklist script along with an interview for you to read. We have a lot of really cool stuff in there. And as always, we continue to add to our issues for a little while after we publish them. So you'll see new articles appear as well. Anyhow, thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. Of course, while you're surfing around online, don't forget to go watch The Virtuoso, kids. It is really important to support independent cinema right now. And you could rent Nick's film on all the places that you would usually rent a movie online, or through on demand through your cable box. And, it also comes out on Blu-ray and DVD on May 4th. So that's another way that you could find it. So thanks for considering to watch the movie as well. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our conversation with director Nick Stagliano about his latest film, The Virtuoso. There's been a lot of talk the last few years about how to do a sex scene and nudity waivers and stuff like that. I was just curious what advice you would give to directors for that, because I mean, nowadays there's even consultants that, you know, want to make sure that everybody's comfortable, which I think is good, and it comes from a good place. What did you learn about shooting a sex scene in the middle of an action movie? Sorry, the end of an action movie, technically.
No, I agreed. No, again, this was even 2 years now, and that world has changed dramatically, right? So now you have to follow more rigid protocol, which you're correct. It's fine. It's in one respect, I was raised a certain way by my parents, right? I would never take advantage of somebody and never do anything like that. I would always have made sure that everybody was comfortable. I always clear sets for anything like that. Nobody needed to tell me that in a rule book or send me a memo, right? But unfortunately, the good ones of us have to usually pay for the not so good ones. But same thing. I would just say, explain, justify the rationale and why it's important, and make sure. And Abby, her credit, didn't have really an issue with it. She understood it because she knew what I was going for there. It's important. That whole scene is important at the end, where you could have just, when we realize he's not going to kill her at the beginning, you could have just cut to post, right? They're just on the pillow. But from his point of view, you wouldn't have finally seen that release that's been held up for 40 years, but even in our specific events of this movie, from the beginning of the movie till now, that clear, just, release of expression that he needed, right? And for her, she had no problem justifying that, because there's a reason he's cleaning his guns in the beginning, and I'm meticulous about that. You keep your tools in pristine condition. Well, guess what? Those are her tools. When you think about it, she was so good, she didn't even have to bring a weapon to the party, because she disarmed him first in the counter scene in the diner, which was the most simple, almost romantic scene, right? And then here. So we're all thrown off by that, the length of it and the sex and the nudity, because we can't then, I don't think the next thing we think is, and after that, she's going to be the bad woman and blow his brains out, right? So she got it, but I would say to new filmmakers or filmmakers now trying to do that, for the right reasons, you really need to have a purpose, and it should really justify its existence in the material, and you have to make sure your actors really buy it, because if not, I'm sure it would look so fake or so bad that they're not easy, really. It's awkward, and I was like, thrilled when it was over. But Anson and Abby worked it out themselves. I just told them the essence of it. We didn't need to be specific that I was like, I'm going to come down off your back and I want you to do this.
There's let them do that. Moment right after the sex scene, where basically she has the gun and there's a click and he holds up the bullet and says it's your choice. And then basically, suddenly, like, she shoots him, in which she's either reloaded the gun or let the first shot be a dry shot, and I'm curious about creating that moment, because it's, that's kind of a surprise moment too.
That was an addition that I added. Anson then felt that it was crucial that, like us, he sort of knows, but because he's off his game, he's not 100% sure. So what he does, especially with his own weapon, if you know that weapon, the mag's in there and all, but he unchambers around, reloads, doesn't recock. So she can drive fire, but the gun's still loaded. And she realizes that. So technically it works and it's correct. And that's what, it wasn't a blank. It wasn't a whatever. He's taken out the round out of the chamber. I liked it, and I backed him, because he was like, look, I'm all in on the fact that if she doesn't go for it, then I can't live this way anyway, but I'm still going to show that I knew. And that was his last because he says to me then, after all this, he says, after all, I'm the virtuoso. So wouldn't I have known to suspect everybody, right? And I was like, I just talked to Fred, and I talked to James, and we were like, I think it's cool. I mean, it's visually strong, I mean, a great shot, Frank worked that out great, where he puts, the focus puller was great. He pulls that bullet right up into the foreground, and you're like, wow, what is going on? It was just that
crazy because he still trusted, because he was longing for that kind of intimacy that even she talked about in the diner scene, saying that she's more interested in, the afterglow after the passion, or, she said something like that. And it's like, it seemed to capture his imagination, and it's just interesting that he still left her with a weapon, knowing that it could end his life. But it's kind of like this, dark, stoic thing that he did, in which he really put his life in her hands.
Yeah. And from his justification, it was the way that he could, again, you always have to back your actor too, right? Maybe. So it was, to me, his way that he could have justified his whole process to get to that position where he was still in charge of his own fate, right? And so he gave her a chance, but he understands what now the mentor already knows, and he's like, if I can turn her, then there might be hope for us, but if not, then I don't want to go on. And that's sure. So it worked for me, and James, we didn't have a problem again. And I thought visually it was strong. And again, it's not 8 minutes of going in a completely different direction. It's one additional shot, but it was just enough to make an audience go, click. What?
Holding up the bullet was great. Was great.
So that was pretty cool.
I know we're starting to run out of time, but I want to hear about your editing process, because editing is the last stage of storytelling. What was something really important that you learned during editing about your film?
There were no horribly deleted scenes, that I would even put on like the DVD extras or something. Like, again, we trimmed the cemetery maybe a minute and a half or so. A lot of the cutting took place in the first act, really, as you could imagine, until he gets to the diner, because we had a lot more shots of eighth page. He goes to the bank. Like in the voiceover early, he refers, you create a mailbox, you create dual identity. He goes to two different banks, to two different safety deposit boxes. Each one has different photographs, different, all that stuff to continue to establish that he's the virtuoso, right? That he's created all this stuff. So those things they were painful for me, because I love everything in my movie, as you know. A couple drive-bys that I wanted to give more distance on that, kind of like a montage there, to get him out of wherever he was with the mentor, so we don't exactly know how far he goes, but by going to the mountains, we can justify the fact that at the mentor's place, it's raining. At the mountains, it's snowing. It could be 2 hours away. It could be 2 days away, right? So, which makes it a little confusing. So you don't know when the mentor's doing all his stuff. You don't know if he's waiting because Anson's 30 minutes away and can come down, or he's days away and he has time to prepare. So, I mean, the editing to me mostly was performance, like cutting, just because we had a lot more breath in between scenes, and normally, you cut right on the syllable to keep things along. But I wanted people to understand the style, the throwback style we were doing. But there's a fine line between doing that well and then doing that where every scene's an extra 5-7 seconds, and that stuff just doesn't amount to 45 seconds. It amounts to people don't like the pace of the movie. We had 3 screenings in New York before everything shut down. Not, one with 8 people, one with 20, and one with 30. And they were a mix of industry and regular people that somehow were associated. And, I thought they were important because inevitably the general public I want to listen to, because that's really who I make the movies to. And they were all, you would hear ooh ah when she comes out of the bathroom, and I'm like, we have a chance pulling that off, right? And so we need to get to that, and so we don't need to necessarily keep chopping. So the editing process, James Lesage did the cutting in New York, and he's a young guy, but he had a good set. He's old throwback, like an old soul like us. Like he could reference the old time movies and directors and, editors too, which was great for me. So we had some pretty good drag outs, fighting about scenes and all, but I like
really
that.
Wait, what was the scene that you fought about?
The cemetery was a battle, just because, again, you imagine, if you will, a minute and a half, 2 more minutes of pure Anthony Hopkins, fantastic.
I see both sides of it though, because it is that tough thing in which
that I wrote.
Well, right, so, but it's like that dangerous thing of it's like, if it's too much of a good thing, like it could get stale. So by taking a minute out, that makes it pop a little more rather than overstay its welcome. I guess that would be the danger, right?
That was it was doubling that, and that's why ultimately I caved in, because a lot of people had the same opinion. It was not only that in and of itself, but where it is, right? It's really just going up to the cards, right? It's the plot point, the end of Act 1, right? It changes the whole tone of the movie. So you didn't need 9 minutes, because then that almost made people forget, would have made people forget what movie they were in, right? So both as a scene in and of itself, but then also the purpose of it being the plot point to shift the focus of the second act, it stalls things. So, so the better answer would have been me on set to direct the scene quicker, if it would have been feasibly possible.
Sure.
But I don't know that with all the time I could have done that, because you couldn't rush Anthony Hopkins in that sequence. Once he got all that dialogue, you just had to let him go at his pace. I mean, I was never a director that would direct like that. I know there are some that just go, great, now let's do another one, just pick up the pace. I don't know.
I mean, like a great wine, you got to give it some air.
You just have to go and live with it, and then do what we just did, see how it plays, fight, cry, cut a minute, cut 30 seconds, fight to get some back. And it's an hour and 45. I think it's, I don't think at a minute and an hour and 35 or cable ready time, I think you would have cut out the heart that separates it, right? As you said, there's a lot of misdirection, and there's a lot of extra things going on, especially then you got that cast, and you have Eddie Marsan and Richard Brake and the great David Morse come in, and they don't even enter the movie until 40-minute mark or something. You would have done a great disservice to.
Well, tell me this: what was your toughest scene? What was your toughest scene on the page as a writer, and what was your toughest scene as a director? And how did you creatively rise through those challenges?
Toughest scene was the cemetery, and it was the best. It's one of those that worked. Toughest because of all, day one, scene one, rusty, a little frightened, a little intimidated, but not showing it, and a lot to get accomplished in a limited amount of time.
How many cameras did you have rolling? 2
cameras, one on a super techno crane, which acted as it was too rugged in our section of the cemetery I wanted to just push in on him for like 4.5 minutes, right? So I used that same shot in the Florentine on Hal Holbrook has a similar monologue that's about 4 minutes. And in fact, Tony had seen that and loved just the simplicity of the coverage, right? And I said, well, that's what we're going to do in the cemetery, because if you go, I'm just going to follow, right? And so we had 2 cameras, and we did probably, I think, 2 2.5 takes of the master on him, because we picked up the second part a third time, right? Because, there was a couple hems and haws and a couple little stumbles. And so, I tried to get it clean, and he wanted it. So we did that. And then when they got close at the end of that scene, we did like 4 takes of the matching coverage because of those little subtleties, like when he goes off on his whole speech about Tony, when he's doing his thing. But then Anson, it's important for his looks and his reactions, even though he's not vocalizing too much, right? So, we had to give him that time. And then, but I think that it's as simple as it was. To me, the toughest scenes were the Abby Anson normal scenes, right? So the counter scene at the diner, and then the next one to me was the toughest, the one in the first one in the motel room, because you just come off a long, simple scene in the diner, right? 2 people sitting. There's only so much you can do with it, but I thought the look of it, Frank Prinzi, the DP, and Norm Dodge dressed that and shot that and made it look beautiful, right? And it's a simple scene that's not, because again, it almost seems like you're in a romance until
she's basically
he remembers burning mom, right? Mom's burning in his brain, and you go, and we now realize that all she's doing is setting him up to kill him, right?
She's playing with her food, basically.
So it's great for that, because in retrospect, she's just working. She's disarming, like he's flashing back, and he's becoming more human. So it's not simple, but it's, in terms of visually, it's, frontal, medium, over, close. It's conventional as you could be, but there was a lot going on. But then you had to follow it up with the motel, which was another 4 or 5 pages. And to me, that was the hardest scene, because I needed to bring life into that, but also hope to keep. So, Anson that was an idea that Anson had that we changed in the script, because he's like, why don't we do this? Because a lot of people are going to be thinking by now that she's part of it, right? So I think I should become the audience and accuse her of being part of it, and let her defend herself so that we could possibly buy some more time, right? Because she pulls it off, right? And I go, yeah, I didn't, because it wasn't really written the way we came out, right? So we added all that stuff. It was just supposed to be the first part where you think she's coming back and they're going to make love then, and just he doesn't want to, basically, and so she falls asleep. The snow keeps her, and then he goes out. But we're like, we've got a moment here where we can have him come back and accuse, and so that was an addition. And to me,
was that something? Was that, sorry to interrupt? Was that something that you wrote on set?
Not on set, but before. But okay. In addition to
before you were shooting, or
before we were shooting.
Okay.
Conversations with Anson earlier, and with Abby, because then we had to, she had to buy into it. And she's like, yeah, no, I get it. I can play that. And that's when she said to me, I'm not going to play her like I'm the killer acting like I'm the waitress. I can't do that. She said, I'm going to play her like I'm the waitress. And I go, yeah, absolutely. Because we all believe that, and that's what we want to believe, right? So to me, I felt, just because of that, stuck in that little room, but having then to have that much action and dialogue, we were limited. And to me, that was the toughest scene, because it comes on right after another long 2-person dialogue scene. The counter first, and then the motel. So, but I think it served its purpose.
You got through it well. Well, look, I know we went over our time. Is there anything you want to tell us about that you're working on next? Any long percolating projects that are your?
Yeah. The one I met Anson on a long time ago, which is just a great. It's in the vein of the Florentine, meaning.
What's the title?
It's called Nebraska Fishing Game. You won't forget that one, Jeff. You usually don't forget my titles, right? So the Nebraska Fishing Game, 5 guys searching for the American dream in a small Nebraska town, and our hero is dying of cancer, and all of his friends try to help him along and live the last remaining time with him. So just a great emotional piece that, once again, will be, I hope, a good ensemble with some really good actors. And then I'm excited about this thing I talked to Tony about called 99, which is more of a crime thriller. So I'm working on that myself. So that's going to be one of those heavy pulls where I actually have to do all the writing work. So I'll check in yourself. 6 months on that one. But yeah, he's interested. And again, I actually have to get him and somebody older than him. So that list is even shorter, but we all know who they are, right? I've lost a bunch of them. It's unfortunate. I'll close on this because I know you brought it up. But the reason I ever thought in the world that I might be able to handle Sir Anthony Hopkins was a couple years prior to that, probably then 2012 or 13. I was back in LA, and I called Hal to go visit him. And we were only a couple of years off of Good Day for It still. So I went up to his place, and Hal and his assistant Joyce, longtime assistant, were there. And I was like, "Hey, what have you been doing there, old timer? How's it going?" And Joyce says, "Oh, we just got back from Canada. We shot a movie in Vancouver, but it was cold." And at this time, Hal was 87 or 88. And I'm like, "What are you doing in the winter? And, if you're going to freeze yourself to death, it should be on one of my movies, not somebody else's, right?" And she says, "Oh, he did it as a favor to his friend Tony." And I go, "Tony, would I?" Because I knew everybody in his universe, right? And I'm like, and I pride myself on knowing every good actor in the world. And I was like, Tony who? She goes, "Oh, Tony Hopkins." And I'm like, "Nah, Tony Hopkins, I don't get it. Would I know him?" And she goes, "I think so." And I go, "How does Hal know him?" She goes, "Well, 40 years ago, they did a picture in London together called The Girl from Virtuoso with Goldie Hawn." And it was Hal's first starring role opposite her. But there was a very young Welsh actor in it that was enamored with the theater and with Richard Burton, who was Welsh. And Hal knew Richard Burton because Hal had already been doing Mark Twain for 20 years or something. And I'm like, "Oh my God!" And I'm like, "So who's this guy?" And she goes, "Tony Hopkins." And I go, "What?" And she goes, "Sir Anthony Hopkins." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, him I know." I'm like, "How does Hal know him?" She goes, "That's awesome. Because of that. They've stayed in touch all these years." And when Tony was doing this movie, there was a part for an older character, and he's like, said to the filmmakers, "You must call my friend Hal Holbrook." And I was like, and then I was like, "Oh my God, I thought I knew everything in Hal's world." And I was like, "Wow, Tony Hopkins." So, it was still Sir Anthony. I'm like, "Sir Anthony Hopkins." And he said to me, he goes, "Oh, you two guys would get along famously." I go, "What? Really?" And I'm like, "This guy, I've directed him twice now. So he knows how I am, and he knows my level." And then I said, "Really, you think so?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah. He doesn't suffer fools. He's right, professional." He goes, he would like you and you would like him." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I just remembered that. And this was even before, like, we had the project there at UTA. And then that list comes up of, it was Michael Douglas, Harrison Ford, a couple of others like that. And I was like, Anthony Hopkins. I'm like, well. And so I said to Tony, I said, "I got this idea for a new thing." I said, "I need you and an older guy." So I said, "Maybe you and Hal," but unfortunately Hal had, gotten sicker, and we lost him too. So that was really, I regret that immensely. Yeah. But
well, I guess the one thing to say, because we've talked about Hal Holbrook so much, is that if you've never seen him in Twain, there are ways to see it online. I believe it's been in the Broadway HD app before, which is a streaming service that has a bunch of new and vintage Broadway productions that were filmed. And so I would definitely say that. But look, you've been extremely generous with your time, Nick, and I cannot wait to see what you do next. So thanks for coming out to speak about the Virtuoso.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I like everything you do. It's important that, we give, more of these films a chance. And thanks a lot, Tim.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Nick Stagliano for being so generous with his time and coming down to chat about the Virtuoso. And remember, it's really important to support independent cinema. So I hope you will search out the Virtuoso and rent it. Or own it as a digital download because it's available digitally today. And, you could also get it on Blu-ray or DVD on May 4th. So I hope you consider taking a look into your options and renting the Virtuoso. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. For starters, you could sign up there for one of these virtual events because this was a virtual screening that I did where people got to see the Virtuoso for free online before the movie came out. And then they got to watch this Q&A as part of that online process. And, we put our Q&As over at Backstory Magazine's YouTube page, so now you could watch it too. But if you want to see virtual movies for free, signing up on our list will notify you when there's an available RSVP. Of course, I also hope you read Backstory Magazine. One fun thing that I did was I created a crossword puzzle. That's right, kids. You could play it for free over at backstory.net. I came up with silly questions. I came up with trivia questions. I came up with silly hints in case you don't understand my trivia questions. So it's all over there, kids, at backstory.net. You could play it for free. You can even print it out and use pen and paper if you insist, but you won't be able to get hints that way. And, I did all this for the Oscars because we just released our Oscar issue number 43. And, what's really fun about the Oscars issue is after the Oscars, it gives you a chance to go back and study and learn from the winners because every issue we have winners in this issue. We have obviously VFX winner Andrew Jackson for Tenet. We have the writers of The Father. We have Eric Messerschmidt, the cinematographer of Mank. We have a good number of winners in that issue. We also have the nominees in there as well. Plus, we print the scripts of all the nominees, contenders, and the winners. So you will have access to read those scripts in the issue as well. So there is a lot to explore in there. Of course, our Oscar issue has non-Oscar articles like a blacklist screenplay you could read along with an interview with the screenwriter. You could also check out our interview with Eric Heiserer for the new Netflix TV show Shadow and Bone. So there's a lot to explore in issue 43, and we are continuing to add new articles to it, which is something fun that we do after we publish because we're a digital magazine. We could do that. If you've never read Backstory before, I hope you check out our free issue over at backstory.net or via our iPad app Backstory to test drive us, see what we're about. And then I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. You could use code word SAVE5 to save $5 off a subscription to Backstory Magazine. It'll get you access to anything new we publish. You'll also have access to our archive, which we are continuing to add old new issues to, meaning that we are continuing to grow it backwards. So you'll see old new issues appear in there. I hope that makes sense to you. But look, it would mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and my YouTube watchers consider supporting my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a Backstory subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to drop me a line, you could always reach me at backstoryletters@gmail.com. I promise not to respond immediately, but I will get back to you. I promise. And you could also find me on social media, on Twitter as Yo Goldsmith or on Twitter as Backstory_mag. I'm those same names on Instagram, Yo Goldsmith on Instagram and Backstory_mag on Instagram. I have a Facebook fan page. I'm on there sometimes, not a lot though. So there's a lot of ways to get me. I'm an easy guy to find. I just don't always respond immediately, so don't get too mad at me about that. But look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.